When we hear about the Ice Age, our imagination conjures up images of a harsh and lifeless land covered in eternal ice. It seems incredible that anyone could have survived in such conditions, let alone our ancestors, cave people, without warm clothing, heating, or other benefits of civilization. However, they not only survived, but also thrived, creating a culture, developing technologies, and exploring new territories. How did they do it? What was their main secret? Perhaps it was their incredible adaptability or something simpler that we, as modern people, have long forgotten? Watch the video to the end to find out how cavemen survived the coldest ice age using only their wits and ingenuity. When we imagine cave people, we naturally think of caves, and that makes sense. Caves provided excellent shelter from the cold, wind, and predators. However, in reality, caves were not the only option, nor were they always the best option. In some regions, there were simply no caves, and not every cave was suitable for living. They were often too damp, cold, or simply dangerous. Therefore, our ancestors were forced to develop building skills. They created temporary dwellings from whatever materials were available: mammoth bones, animal skins, wood, and even turf. Although these structures seem primitive, they were actually very effective. They created a kind of microclimate that helped to retain heat. Which of these materials do you think was the most effective for building a warm home? And would you use it in your home today? Write your answers in the comments. The main principle of their construction was the use of natural barriers. For example, they could build their dwellings at the foot of cliffs or inside shallow depressions, which protected them from the wind. They used long mammoth bones as the basis for the frame, as they were strong and readily available in those regions. Skins were stretched over the frame, and turf or branches could be laid on top. In the center of such a dwelling was a hearth, which not only provided heat but also protected against predators. Smoke escaped through a small hole in the roof. The interior space was small, which allowed it to be heated quickly. Such dwellings could be dismantled and moved to a new location, which was very important for a nomadic lifestyle. These temporary structures were not just shelters, but true works of engineering created under extreme conditions. It was adaptation to the environment and creative thinking that helped our ancestors survive. They did not just use what they found, but actively transform natural materials. For example, mammoth bones, in addition to their obvious strength, had another important property: they retained heat well. This was especially important during the Ice Age, when temperatures could drop to extremely low levels. These dwellings, known as mammoth huts, were true architectural wonders of their time. Their designs were thought out down to the smallest detail. The foundation was made of large bones that were dug into the ground, and the upper part of the frame was formed from smaller bones and tusks. Then everything was covered with skins, and branches, turf, and even clay were laid on top, creating a reliable multi-layered heat-insulating shield. This design not only protected against the cold, but also helped to retain the heat generated by the hearth. The chimney was designed to minimize heat loss, allowing only a small amount of smoke to escape. In addition to bones and skins, our ancestors also actively used wood. In regions rich in forests, they built sturdy huts and dugouts. Dugouts, for example, were depressions in the ground that were then covered with wooden structures and turf. This location below ground level provided additional protection from wind and cold. The walls of dugouts could be lined with stones, which helped to keep the heat inside. These dwellings were more permanent and were usually used in places with abundant resources, where there was no need for constant migration. They were more complex to build, but also more durable. The construction of such dwellings required collective labor and a certain level of social organization. This suggests that our ancestors were not loners, but lived and worked in groups where everyone had their own role to play. Our ancestors were forced to wear clothes to survive in the cold. However, their clothes were not just skins thrown over their shoulders, as we tend to think. They were complex, multi-layered structures that provided reliable protection from low temperatures. Animal skins, such as those of deer, mammoths, and bears, were used as the main material. They had excellent thermal insulation properties. The skins were processed and dried, then sewn together using tendons and bone needles. Different types of skins were used to create multi-layered clothing. For example, the inner layer could be made of softer skin and the outer layer of thicker, waterproof skin. What do you think was their main secret the skillful processing of the skins, or what they did to keep warm when their clothes didn't help. We'll tell you more about that later. Making such clothing was a laborious and complex process that required special skills. The skins had to be not only removed, but also properly processed, cleaned of flesh, softened, and dried. Stone scrapers and other tools were used for this purpose. Then the necessary pieces were cut out of the skins and sewn together. It was important to make the seams tight so that cold air could not penetrate inside. For this purpose, animal tendons were used, which became very strong when dried. The clothes were not only warm, but also practical. They did not restrict movement, which was very important for hunting. Footwear was also multi-layered, with fur inside to help retain heat. Thus, the clothes of cave people were true works of art that helped them survive. The main secret of their survival was not only the skillful processing of skins, but also a systematic approach to making clothes. Our ancestors understood that effective protection from the cold required not one, but several layers. The inner layer, close to the body, was often made of soft, thin skin or fur to provide comfort and wick away moisture. The middle layer served as the main insulator, while the outer layer protected against wind and moisture. This is similar to the modern principle of layered clothing that we use today. Every piece of clothing, from headwear to footwear, was carefully designed. Headwear could be made from skins with the fur on the outside, which helped protect the head and ears from frostbite. Shoes, in turn, consisted of several layers of skins sewn together to retain heat as much as possible. Dry grass or moss could be added inside the shoes to provide additional insulation and absorb moisture. The process of processing skins was a real art, passed down from generation to generation. Skins were processed not only to make them durable, but also to preserve their flexibility. After cleaning off any remaining flesh and fat, the skins were kneaded to prevent them from becoming stiff and brittle. Various tools were used for this purpose, including stone scrapers. The skins were then dried in the sun or over a fire. To preserve their properties, they could be coated with animal fat, which made them more waterproof. This process was laborious, but the result was worth the effort. Properly treated skins could last for many years, providing reliable protection. Sewing skills were also highly developed. Bone needles were very thin and strong, allowing for neat and tight stitches. Animal tendons were used as thread, which dried and tightened, making the seams even stronger and more airtight. All this speaks to the high level of craftsmanship of our ancestors. Fire was, of course, one of the most important discoveries that helped cave dwellers survive. It provided heat, light, protection from predators, and the ability to cook food. However, keeping a fire going required a lot of fuel, which was not always available during the Ice Age. Therefore, our ancestors were forced to look for alternative sources of heat, and they found them in animal fat. Fat was not just food, but a universal source of energy and heat. They used it to create primitive lamps. Fat was poured into small depressions in stones, and moss or plant fibers were used as wicks. These lamps provided light, but more importantly, they provided heat. They could burn for hours, creating a cozy atmosphere in a cave or dwelling. Fat was also used to warm the body. They could rub it on their skin, which created an extra layer of protection from the cold and wind. Fat was one of the most important resources that helped them survive in low temperatures. It was not only a source of heat, but also of energy. Consuming large amounts of fatty foods helped maintain body temperature and provided energy for hunting and other activities. Thus, fat was not just part of the diet, but one of the key elements that helped cave dwellers survive the Ice Age. Their ability to use fat as fuel and a means of warming the body was a real discovery. In addition to using fat as fuel, our ancestors also actively used it for preserving and processing materials. For example, fat could be used to impregnate skins, making them more waterproof and soft. This was especially important for making clothing and footwear that had to withstand harsh weather conditions. Fat was mixed with pigments to create paints for rock art. These paints were very durable and have survived for thousands of years, allowing us to see their art today. Thus, fat was not just a source of heat, but a universal resource that was used in almost all areas of their lives. It was so valuable that it could be stored in special containers made from animal bones or horns. Body temperature regulation was also an important aspect. Consuming large amounts of fat, especially during cold seasons, allowed the body to accumulate subcutaneous fat, which served as a natural insulator. This mechanism, common to many Arctic animals, helped our ancestors maintain a stable body temperature even in extreme cold. They instinctively understood that fat was not just food, but a strategic reserve of energy and heat. Fat was also a source of essential vitamins, especially fat-soluble ones, which were critical for health in a diet that was otherwise sparse. This deep connection between nutrition and survival shows how closely our ancestors were tied to their environment and how skillfully they used its resources. Hunting was the main occupation of cave dwellers. They hunted large animals such as mammoths, woolly rhinos, and deer. Hunting such animals was very dangerous, but it provided them not only with food, but also with other resources that were necessary for survival. Mammoth bones were used to build dwellings. Hides were used for clothing, tendons were used for sewing, and fat was used for heating. Thus, hunting was not just a way to obtain food, but a whole complex of activities that provided them with everything they needed. They used primitive but effective tools for hunting, such as spears with stone tips. Hunting was not an individual activity, but a collective one, which increased the chances of success. What do you think was the most valuable resource they obtained from hunting large animals? Hunting required not only strength and agility, but also intelligence. Cave people were excellent strategists. They used the terrain to trap animals or drive them to cliffs. They could camouflage themselves to get close to an animal unnoticed. Hunting large animals could last several days and required great endurance and patience from the hunters. They also used dogs as hunting assistants. Dogs helped them track prey and drive it into traps. After a successful hunt, they divided the spoils among all members of the tribe. Thus, hunting was not only a means of obtaining food, but also a way to strengthen social ties within the tribe. The most valuable resource they obtained from hunting was not just food or materials, but the survival of the tribe itself. Hunting was the central event around which all life was built. It determined the social structure, roles in society, and even cultural traditions. Successful hunting provided food and warmth not only for hunters, but also for the elderly, women, and children. This strengthened the sense of community and interdependence. Hunting also contributed to the development of communication and planning. Hunters had to coordinate their actions, exchange information, and develop complex strategies. This contributed to the development of language and abstract thinking. Hunting was also a source of raw materials for tools. Animal bones and horns were used to make spearheads, knives, scrapers, and needles. These tools were necessary for processing hides, building dwellings, and other everyday tasks. Hunting large animals provided a huge amount of materials that could be used for a long time. For example, a single mammoth could provide a whole tribe with food and materials for several months. This allowed them to worry less about survival and devote more time to developing their skills and culture. Thus, hunting was not just a means of obtaining food, but a driving force behind evolution and social development. But was their entire life reduced to an endless struggle for survival? Or was there room for something more, something that made them human? Survival in the Ice Age required not only material goods, but also a certain culture. Cave dwellers were forced to migrate, which required a certain degree of organization and discipline. They lived in small groups, which allowed them to move quickly and adapt to new conditions. They had a strict hierarchy that helped maintain order and discipline. They passed on their knowledge and skills from generation to generation. This was very important, as each new member of the tribe had to be able to hunt, build a shelter, and make clothes. They developed their communication skills, which helped them coordinate their actions while hunting and in other situations. The culture of survival also included certain rituals and beliefs. They believed in nature spirits that could help them hunt or protect them from evil forces. They created rock paintings depicting hunting scenes and other important events in their lives. These drawings were not simply works of art, but a way to pass on knowledge and experience to future generations. Thus, the culture of cave dwellers was an integral part of their survival. They did not merely survive, but evolved, creating their own unique culture. Cave people lived in small groups consisting of several families. This social structure was very effective for survival during the Ice Age. Each member of the tribe had their own role. Men were hunters, while women gathered food, cooked, and made clothes. This division of labor allowed them to use their resources efficiently. They helped each other, shared food and knowledge, If someone got sick or injured, the other members of the tribe helped them survive. This was very important, as it was almost impossible to survive alone in such conditions. What do you think was the most important factor in maintaining unity within the tribe? Watch the video to the end to find out the answer to this question. The social structure of cave people was very flexible. If a group became too large, it could split into several smaller groups. This allowed them to use resources more efficiently. They could also join forces with other tribes to hunt large animals or defend themselves against predators. Thus, the social structure of cave people was very effective and flexible, which helped them survive during the Ice Age. The basis of this social structure was interdependence. Every member of the tribe was important, and their contribution to the common cause was valued. Hunters risked their lives to obtain food, while women and children provided the tribe with plant food and processed skins to make clothing and shelter. This balance of roles created a strong social fabric. In addition to the division of labor, the exchange of knowledge played a key role. Hunting techniques, methods of processing stone and skins, as well as knowledge of edible plants and animal behavior, were passed down from the older generation to the younger. Elders who had accumulated life experience were valued advisors. Thus, the unity of the tribe was based not only on common blood ties, but also on shared life experience and knowledge. Fire was one of the most important discoveries that helped cave dwellers survive. It provided heat, light, protection from predators, and the ability to cook food. However, fire was also used as a tool. They could use it to harden spear tips, making them more durable. They also used fire to create stone tools. They could heat the stone and then cool it quickly, making it more brittle and easier to work with. Fire was also used for communication. They could send signals using smoke, which was very important for long-distance communication. They also used fire to create rock paintings. They could use charcoal to draw on cave walls. Thus, fire was not just a source of heat, but a universal tool that helped them survive and evolve. The use of fire and technological processes demonstrates the high level of intelligence of our ancestors. Heating flint before processing, known as heat treatment, made it possible to obtain sharper and thinner blades. This significantly increased the efficiency of tools. In addition, fire was used to clear the land of vegetation for easier hunting and to fire clay, from which primitive containers could be made. Control over fire also made it possible to live in cold regions, which expanded the range of human habitation. Finally, fire contributed to the development of social rituals. Evenings around the campfire were a time for storytelling, communication, and the transmission of traditions, which strengthened bonds within the tribe. Cave people used various tools for their needs, which they made from stone, bone, and wood. Stone tools were the most common. They used them for hunting, butchering, skinning, and other needs. Stone tools were very sharp and durable, which made them very effective. They also used tools made from bones. For example, they made needles from bones, which they used to sew clothes. They also made fishing hooks and other tools from bones. Wooden tools were less common because wood rots quickly and does not preserve as well as stone or bone. However, they could use wood to make spears and other tools. Thus, the tools of cave people were very diverse and effective. The skill of tool making was key to survival. The technology of stone flint knapping required not only strength, but also precision. Each blow had to be carefully measured to achieve the desired shape and sharpness. Over time, tools became more specialized. Scrapers for hides, chisels for bone and wood, and axes appeared. The use of bone and antler tools demonstrates an even higher level of technological development. Bone needles with eyes allowed for the creation of layered clothing, which was critical for survival in cold climates. Wooden spears, often with stone tips, were the main weapons used for hunting. Although wooden tools have rarely been preserved, their existence is confirmed by traces of their use on other materials. Cave dwellers were keen observers. They knew where to find food, how to catch animals, and how to avoid danger. They possessed extensive knowledge of nature, which they passed down from generation to generation. They knew which plants were edible and which were poisonous, where to find water, and how to determine direction by the stars. This knowledge was vital for survival. They also knew how to predict the weather. They observed animal behavior, cloud movements, and other natural phenomena. This knowledge helped them prepare for cold weather or other dangers. Thus, understanding nature was one of the most important factors that helped cave people survive. Their knowledge of nature was not just a set of facts, but a complete system of survival. They knew how animal behavior changed depending on the season, which helped them plan their hunts. For example, they knew when deer herds migrated and could set up ambushes along their path. Observing the stars and the sun helped them navigate space and time. This allowed them to track the changing seasons and prepare for winter. Plant foods were an important addition to their meat-based diet, and knowing where and when to gather edible berries and roots was vital. Passing this knowledge on through oral stories and rock paintings was part of their culture and ensured their survival. Genetic adaptation also played a role in the survival of cave people. They possessed certain genes that helped them tolerate the cold better. For example, they may have had a more compact body type, which helped them retain heat. They may also have had darker skin, which protected them from ultraviolet radiation. These genetic adaptations were passed down from generation to generation. People who were better adapted to the cold survived and passed on their genes. Thus, the Ice Age was a kind of natural selection that contributed to the formation of stronger and more resilient people. Genetic research shows that our ancestors had specific mutations that helped them adapt to the cold. For example, the genes responsible for fat metabolism may have been more active, allowing them to use fat tissue more efficiently for energy and heat. A stocky build and shorter limbs, like those of Neanderthals, helped reduce heat loss, which was critical in cold temperatures. It is also believed that genes related to the immune system evolved to resist new diseases encountered in harsh conditions. All these genetic changes were the result of natural selection acting over tens of thousands of years. We have looked at many factors that helped cave people survive the coldest ice age. Their secret lies not in one specific aspect, but in a combination of lifestyle, culture, genetics, and natural adaptation. They were not just savages, but intelligent and resourceful people who knew how to survive in the harshest conditions. Their experience is a valuable lesson for us modern people, who often forget our roots. What do you think about this? What other survival secrets of primitive people would you like to see on our channel? Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new episodes.